The rain hammered against the dining room window that Thursday evening, each drop exploding like tiny bullets against the glass. David Chen sat motionless in his Mercedes, hands still gripping the steering wheel, though the engine had died minutes ago. Through the water-streaked window of his own home, he could see something that would shatter the careful illusion he had built over the past 6 months. His 7-year-old daughter, Emma, knelt on the hardwood floor beside her baby brother, Oliver. Both children hunched over the metal dog bowl that belonged to Rocky, their golden retriever. Emma's small fingers trembled as she scooped wet kibble mixed with table scraps, feeding Oliver first before taking any for herself. The 18-month-old boy grabbed at the food with desperate hands, shoving it into his mouth without chewing. David felt his heart stop. Actually stop. The world tilted sideways, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what his eyes were telling him. His children, his babies, eating from the bark's bowl like starving animals. He thought back to that morning, 12 hours ago. He had kissed Emma's forehead while she still slept, touched Oliver's cheek in the crib, and left for the office at 6:15. Another day of conference calls and merger negotiations. Another day of building an empire while his family ate breakfast without him. Another day of telling himself they were fine. They were being cared for. Vivian was family, and family took care of each other. But as David stared through that rain-soaked window, watching his daughter's hands shake with something that looked less like cold and more like terror, a terrible truth began to crystallize in his mind. This wasn't the first time. The bowl was too clean around the edges where little hands had scraped for every last morsel. Emma moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. And the way she kept glancing toward the stairs, that look of pure animal fear in her eyes. Something was very, very wrong. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his vice president. The Tokyo merger needed his signature tonight. $14 million waited for his approval. 6 months ago, he would have driven straight back to the office. 6 months ago, he would have convinced himself that what he saw was some kind of game, some childish pretend play that meant nothing. But 6 months ago, his wife Sarah hadn't been dead yet. The car door opened with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet garage. David stepped out into the rain, feeling it soak through his $2,000 suit. He didn't care. For the first time in half a year, the only thing that mattered was getting to his children. His hand touched the door handle. Through the glass panel, he saw Emma's head snap toward him. The expression on her face made his blood run cold. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't shame at being caught doing something wrong. It was pure, undiluted terror, the kind of fear that comes from knowing that discovery means punishment. Severe punishment. The door swung open. Emma grabbed Oliver, tried to shield him with her tiny body. Her voice came out at a desperate whisper. Daddy, go. Please, you have to go right now. If Aunt Vivian knows you're home early, she'll... But Emma couldn't finish. The sharp click of high heels on the stairs cut through the air like a knife. David watched his daughter's entire body go rigid, watched the color drain from her face, watched her arms tighten around Oliver in a protective gesture that was far too adult, far too knowing for a 7-year-old child. Vivian Morgan appeared at the base of the stairs, Sarah's younger sister, the woman who had promised to help him through his grief. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater and designer jeans, her makeup perfect, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. When she saw David standing in the doorway, soaking wet and staring at his children on the floor, her face transformed into an expression of shock and concern so flawless it could have won an Oscar. David, oh my God, you're home early. I didn't expect... Oh no. Her eyes went to Emma and Oliver crouched by the dog bowl. Her hand flew to her chest in a gesture of maternal distress. Did they get into Rocky's food again? Emma, sweetheart, we've talked about this so many times. She moved toward the children with her arms outstretched, the picture of a concerned caretaker. But David saw something else. He saw the way Emma flinched. He saw the way the little girl pulled Oliver closer, putting her own body between the baby and Vivian's approaching form. He saw the dog bowl, scraped completely clean, in a way that spoke of genuine hunger, not childish curiosity. And he saw Vivian's eyes. Just for a fraction of a second, before the mask of concern slid back into place, he saw something cold and calculating flash across her face. Something that said she knew. She knew he had seen something. She knew the careful game was over. Vivian, David's voice came out flat, dead, the tone he used in boardrooms when he was about to destroy a competitor. Get away from my children. She stopped, blinked. The concerned aunt routine flickered like a television with bad reception. David, I don't understand. I'm just trying to help. Emma has been having these episodes. The therapist said it's not uncommon for children who have lost a parent to act out in unusual ways. She refuses to eat regular meals and then sneaks down here to stop talking. David stepped fully into the house, his shoes leaving wet prints on the hardwood. Emma, Oliver, come here. Right now. Emma didn't move. She looked from David to Vivian and back again, and David saw a terrible understanding in his daughter's eyes. She was calculating, weighing options, trying to decide if her father's protection was real or just another trap. A 7-year-old child should never have to make that kind of calculation. Emma. David dropped to one knee, making himself small, unthreatening. He held out his arms. Baby girl, I promise you, on mommy's memory, on everything I have, nothing bad will happen. Come to daddy. Something in his voice must have reached her. Emma's lower lip trembled. Her arms tightened around Oliver one more time, and then she was moving, scrambling across the floor with her baby brother clutched against her chest. She crashed into David's arms with enough force to knock him back on his heels. Her whole body shook like a leaf in a hurricane. Daddy, she sobbed into his wetsuit jacket. Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. Oliver started crying too, that weak, tired sound that made David's heart clench. He gathered both children into his arms, feeling how light they were. Too light. Emma's ribs pressed against him through her thin shirt. Oliver weighed almost nothing. At 18 months, a healthy toddler should be solid, heavy with baby fat and growing muscle. His son felt like a bundle of sticks. David looked up at Vivian over his children's heads. She stood frozen, her hands still outstretched in that caring gesture. But her eyes had gone flat, empty. All pretense had dropped away, and what remained was something David had never seen before. Something that had been hiding behind Sarah's sister's face for 6 months while he drowned himself in work and grief. How long? His voice was barely a whisper. Vivian tilted her head. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. How long what, David? How long have you been starving my children? The smile widened. Starving is such an ugly word. I'd say rationing. 1 meal a day. Dinner at 8. Sometimes I'm generous and give them lunch on weekends. They've been getting plenty, really. More than they deserve for all the trouble they cause. Emma whimpered against David's chest. He felt her trying to burrow deeper into his embrace, trying to make herself disappear. His arms tightened around both children. What else? The words came out like ground glass. What else have you done? David, you're being dramatic. I've done what needed to be done. What you were too busy to do. You want to know what else? Fine, let's see. Vivian began counting on her manicured fingers. I locked them in the upstairs closet during the day while you worked. Had to. Emma wouldn't stop crying for you at first, and Oliver screamed every time I put him down. The neighbors were starting to notice, so I installed a nice little lock on the linen closet. Very secure. They learned to be quiet after a week or so. David's vision went red. His hands started shaking, but he forced himself to stay still, to listen, to understand the full scope of the nightmare his children had been living. Oh, and the discipline, can't forget that. Vivian examined her nails casually. Emma needed some firm correction when she tried to sneak food from the pantry. Nothing too severe, just enough to teach her respect. And Oliver, well, babies are so difficult, aren't they? Always crying and needing things. I found that a little medicinal assistance helped him sleep through the day. Children's sleep medicine. Very safe. Well, mostly safe at the doses I used. Emma's body went completely rigid in David's arms. Daddy, she whispered. Last night, Oliver. He won't wake up he's sick. David's blood turned to ice. What did you give him? Vivian shrugged. Just some over-the-counter sleep aid. Maybe a bit more than the bottle recommends, but he was being so fussy. You know how it is with children. They need to learn to be quiet, not bother people. David very carefully set Emma down. He checked Oliver's face, his color, the slow rise and fall of his chest. The toddler's pupils were dilated even in the bright dining room light. His breathing was shallow. His skin had a grayish tint that made David's medical instincts scream danger. "How much did you give him?" David asked, his voice deadly calm now. "I don't know, 4? 5 tablets? He needed to sleep. I had plans last night, and I couldn't deal with him crying." 4 or 5 adult tablets of sleep medication in an 18-month-old body. David did the math in his head. That was easily 10 times the safe dose for a child Oliver's size. Enough to cause serious harm. Possibly permanent damage. Possibly death if the dose had been any higher, or if Oliver's system couldn't metabolize it fast enough. His son could have died last night, while David sat in his penthouse office reviewing merger documents and drinking single malt scotch. His son could have stopped breathing in a locked closet, and David would have come home to find Emma hysterical and Oliver cold. The rage that filled David Chen in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was clean, pure, absolute. Not the hot anger of a moment, but the cold certainty of a man who had finally seen the truth and would burn the world down to make it right. But he couldn't give in to rage. Not yet. His children needed him calm, needed him thinking, needed him to be the father he should have been 6 months ago. "Vivian," David stood slowly, pulling out his phone. "You need to leave this house, right now." She laughed, actually laughed. "Leave? This is as much my house as yours, David. I have legal guardianship papers signed by Sarah herself. If anything happens to you, these children are mine. And let's be honest, you don't want to call the police, because then everyone would know what a terrible father you've been. 6 months and you never noticed your own children were being abused. What would that look like in the news? CEO too busy making money to save his own kids." David's finger hovered over the emergency call button. She was right. She had thought this through. Sarah had signed those papers in the hospital when she was dying and terrified about what would happen to Emma and Oliver. David had been so exhausted, so grief-stricken, that he had barely read them before adding his own signature. He had trusted Vivian, family, blood, Sarah's sister. What a fool he had been. "Emma," David said quietly, not taking his eyes off Vivian. "Go to the bathroom. Take Oliver. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." Emma didn't argue. She grabbed her little brother and ran, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood. The bathroom door slammed. The lock clicked. Only then did David take a full breath. "You're not calling anyone," Vivian said confidently, "because you know I'm right. By the time any investigation is done, I'll have convinced everyone that you're the problem. Absent father, workaholic, probably drinking, making wild accusations against the devoted aunt who sacrificed everything to care for his children. Who do you think they'll believe?" "You're probably right." David slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Which is why I'm going to do this differently." He moved so fast that Vivian didn't have time to react. One moment he was standing by the door, the next he had her arm twisted behind her back and was walking her forcefully toward the front entrance. She screamed and thrashed, but David had 80 pounds and 6 inches on her. He propelled her through the door and onto the wet porch. "You are banned from this property," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet suburban street. "If you come back, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I'm calling my lawyer tonight to revoke any guardianship papers. You will never see my children again." Vivian spun around, her perfect hair now plastered to her face by rain. The mask was completely gone now. What remained was pure venom. "You think you can just throw me out after everything your wife promised me? 10 years I took care of Sarah. 10 years of my life watching her waste away while you built your empire. She promised I'd be taken care of. She promised. Sarah owed you nothing. You chose to help your sister. That was your choice. And this is mine." Vivian's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "You think this is over? You think you can just change some paperwork and I'll go away? I have friends, David. People who know how to handle problems like you. People who would be very interested in helping me get what I'm owed." She turned and walked down the driveway into the rain, her heels clicking on the wet pavement. At the street, she stopped and looked back. "Be careful driving to work tomorrow, David. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't pay attention. Then she was gone, vanishing into the darkness beyond the streetlights. David stood on the porch for a long moment, rain soaking him to the skin. His hands were shaking now. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. He had just made an enemy of someone who had spent 6 months carefully planning something. Someone who had legal documents in a network of people willing to help her. But none of that mattered as much as the sound coming from inside the house. The sound of Emma's muffled crying through the bathroom door. The sound of Oliver's weak whimpers. David went back inside, locked the front door, and made his way to the bathroom. He knocked gently. "Emma, baby, it's Daddy. She's gone. You can come out now." The lock clicked. The door opened a crack. Emma's face appeared streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at David like she still wasn't sure if he was real. If this was really happening. If he would really protect them this time. "She's really gone." Emma's voice was so small. "She's really gone." "Forever?" "Forever." Emma's face crumpled. She fell into his arms again, and this time the sobs were different. Not terror, relief, pure overwhelming relief of a child who had been holding herself together for so long and could finally let go. David picked up Oliver with his other arm. The toddler was barely conscious, his head lolling against David's shoulder. He needed a hospital, immediately. But first, David needed to understand everything, needed to document it, needed to build a case so strong that Vivian could never touch his children again. He carried them both upstairs. Emma led him to the linen closet in the hallway. When she opened the door, David felt his stomach turn over. Someone had installed an industrial lock on the outside. Inside the closet, bolted to the wall, was a length of chain with a leather cuff, just long enough to let a child sit but not stand. A plastic bucket sat in the corner, the smell making it clear what it had been used for. The closet had no light, no windows, just darkness and the chain. "She locked you in here?" David's voice broke. Emma nodded. "Every day when you left for work. Sometimes she forgot to let us out until you came home. Once she left us all weekend when she went to New York for shopping. 3 days, in the dark, chained, a 7-year-old trying to care for a baby in hell. And David had been reviewing acquisition reports and celebrating deals, completely oblivious. He pulled out his phone and took pictures. Every angle of the closet, the chain, the bucket, the lock. Then he took pictures of Emma's arms where bruises were fading to yellow. Oliver's legs where finger marks showed clearly against pale skin. He documented everything while Emma watched, her face blank with exhaustion. "Daddy, are you going to call the police now?" "Not yet." David knelt down to her level. "First, we're taking Oliver to the hospital. He needs a doctor right now. And while we're there, they're going to examine both of you. Take pictures of every bruise, every mark. Then we're going to my lawyer's office, and we're going to make absolutely sure that Vivian can never hurt you again. And then, only then, will I call the police with so much evidence that they'll have to arrest her immediately." She said she has papers. "Legal papers that make us hers if anything happens to you." "I know, but those papers can be challenged. And they will be. I promise you, Emma. I swear on your mother's memory. Vivian will never touch you again." Emma searched his face for a long moment. Then she asked the question that broke David's heart into 1,000 pieces. "Daddy, why didn't you notice? Why didn't you see what she was doing?" And David, who had spent 6 months lying to himself and hiding in work, who had convinced himself his children were fine because it was easier than facing his grief, who had chosen his own comfort over his duty as a father, finally told the truth. "Because I was afraid. After Mommy died, I was so scared and so sad that I couldn't think about anything else. So I ran away. I hid in my work and told myself you were okay, because if I admitted you weren't, then I'd have to deal with it. I'd have to feel things. And I was too weak to do that. I failed you, Emma. I failed you and Oliver in the worst way possible." Emma stared at him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then she said something that would echo in David's mind for the rest of his life. "But you came back. You saw us. And you didn't look away." David gathered both children close, feeling their small hearts beating against his chest. "I will never look away again. From this moment on, you two are the only thing that matters. Not work, not money, not anything else. Just you. He carried them down to the garage and buckled them into the car seats he had barely used in 6 months. As he pulled out into the rain, heading toward the hospital, his phone buzzed with another message from the office. The Tokyo merger needed immediate attention. $14 million waited for his decision. David deleted the message without reading it. Then he called his vice president. Tom, I need you to take over the Tokyo deal and the San Francisco acquisition and everything else. I'm taking a leave of absence. Indefinite. Starting right now. There was a long pause on the other end. David, are you serious? We're in the middle of the biggest quarter of the year. I'm completely serious. You're acting CEO as of this moment. I'll have the board approve it tomorrow. What happened? Is everything okay? David looked in the rearview mirror at Emma's pale face, at Oliver's drooping head. No, everything is not okay, but it will be. I'm going to make sure of it. He hung up and focused on driving, on getting his children to safety, on beginning the long, difficult process of fixing what he had allowed to break. But as the hospital lights came into view through the rain, David couldn't shake the memory of Vivian's final words. Be careful driving to work tomorrow. Accidents happen. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Somewhere out there in the night, Vivian Morgan was planning something. Something worse than abuse and starvation. Something that would require David to be removed permanently so she could claim her prize. His children. The game had changed. Vivian had spent 6 months thinking she was dealing with a weak, absent father who could be manipulated and controlled. But she had made one critical mistake. She had shown her hand too early. And now David knew exactly what he was fighting for. Everything. The emergency room doors slid open with a mechanical whisper. David carried Oliver in his arms while Emma clutched his hand. A tired-looking nurse at the intake desk looked up, took one glance at the children, and her expression transformed from bored to alarmed. We need a doctor right now, David said. My son was given adult sleep medication. Multiple doses. He's been unresponsive for over 12 hours. The nurse hit a button. Alarms started going off. Suddenly there were doctors and more nurses taking Oliver from David's arms, asking rapid-fire questions about dosage and timing and symptoms. David answered everything as calmly as he could, while Emma pressed herself against his leg, terrified by the chaos. They took Oliver back immediately. A young doctor with kind eyes knelt down in front of Emma. Sweetheart, we're going to help your brother, and I'd like to make sure you're okay too. Would that be all right? Emma looked up at David. He nodded. It's okay, baby. Tell them the truth. Everything. So Emma told them about the closet, the chain, the hunger, the bruises. And as she talked, David watched the medical staff's faces change from concerned to horrified. The kind doctor examining Emma called for a social worker, then security, then the police. This was happening whether David wanted it to or not. The hospital was a mandatory reporter. They would call Child Protective Services. There would be an investigation. Into Vivian, into David himself for failing to notice. David sat in a plastic chair and put his head in his hands. 6 months ago, he had been at the top of the world. Successful CEO, loving husband, 2 beautiful children. Then Sarah died and he let everything else die with her. His attention, his presence, his basic duty as a father. A hand touched his shoulder. He looked up to see an older woman with gray hair and warm brown eyes. She wore a badge that said Karen Martinez, MSW, Child Protective Services. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions. And so it began. The questions about how long, how often did you notice? Why didn't you report? Where were you? What were you doing? David answered every single one truthfully. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to minimize his failure. He laid it all out, every shameful detail of how he had chosen work over his children because facing his grief was too hard. Karen Martinez wrote everything down. When she finished, she looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Chen, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I've seen every kind of abuse and neglect you can imagine. And I can tell you right now that what happened to your children was not your fault. Or, how can you say that? I let it happen. I was right there and I didn't see. Because Vivian Morgan is what we call a skilled manipulator. She knew exactly how to present herself to you, to the neighbors, to anyone who might question her. and she knew exactly how to exploit your grief. You're not the villain here, Mr. Chen, but I need you to understand something. Karen leaned forward, her eyes intense. The state is going to investigate you too. They have to. And they're going to look at your work schedule, your income, your ability to care for your children going forward. You need to make some serious changes if you want to keep custody. Whatever it takes. I'll quit my job if I have to. That might actually help your case. Karen's expression softened. The fact that you saw what was happening and immediately removed Vivian, that you brought your children here for treatment, that you're being honest about your mistakes, all of that matters. But actions matter more than words. You're going to have to prove you're ready to be the father Emma and Oliver need. I am. I swear I am. Then prove it, starting right now. David stayed at the hospital all night. He held Emma while she slept fitfully in a pediatric bed, her small body finally relaxed enough to rest. He watched through the window as doctors worked on Oliver, flushing his system, running tests, monitoring his vital signs. The toddler would recover, they said, physically, but there might be developmental delays. Only time would tell if the repeated drugging had caused permanent harm. At dawn, a police detective arrived. Detective Rodriguez, middle-aged and sharp-eyed, took David's statement about everything that had happened. Then she asked the question David had been dreading. Mr. Chen, your sister-in-law made some threats when you removed her from the property. Do you feel you or your children are in immediate danger? David thought about Vivian's words, her promise of accidents, her mention of friends who could handle problems. Yes, I think she's planning something. She spent 6 months setting up a situation where she would get custody of my children and control of my assets if I died. When I caught her, she didn't react like someone whose plan had fallen apart. She reacted like someone whose plan had been accelerated. Rodriguez nodded slowly. We'll send units to watch your house and the hospital, and I'll put out a bolo for Vivian Morgan. But Mr. Chen, I need you to understand something. Until we have evidence of an actual crime beyond child abuse, until we can prove she's planning violence, our hands are somewhat tied. So what do? You watch your back, you vary your routines, you don't go anywhere alone, and you wait for us to build our case. Rodriguez handed him a card, my direct line, anytime, day or night. If you see anything suspicious, you call me immediately. David slipped the card into his wallet, next to the photo of Sarah he still carried. His dead wife smiled up at him from the picture, taken on their honeymoon 10 years ago. She looked so happy, so full of life. If she could see what her sister had become, what she had done to their children, it would destroy her all over again. I'm sorry, David whispered to the photo. I'm sorry I failed them. But I'm going to fix this, I promise. The day passed in a blur of doctors and social workers and lawyers. Michael Bradford, David's attorney, arrived around noon with an emergency custody petition and a motion to revoke Vivian's guardianship papers. They would go before a judge first thing Monday morning. This is going to get ugly, Michael warned. Vivian has those signed documents from Sarah. Even with the abuse allegations, she might try to fight for custody. And she's right about one thing. The press is going to have a field day with this. CEO too busy to notice his children being abused. It plays into every negative stereotype about wealthy absent fathers. I don't care about the press. I care about keeping my children safe. Then you need to be prepared for them to dig into everything. Your work hours, your social life, your finances. They're going to paint you as neglectful at best. I was neglectful. Let them say it. As long as Emma and Oliver stay with me, they can say whatever they want. By evening, Oliver was stable enough to be moved to a regular pediatric room. David sat between his children's beds, holding Emma's hand in one of his and touching Oliver's cheek with the other. Both were finally sleeping peacefully, their small faces relaxed in a way he hadn't seen in months. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Enjoying your last moments with them. Don't get too comfortable. What's yours will soon be mine, along with everything else. Sleep well, David, while you still can. David showed the text to the police officer stationed outside the room. The officer nodded grimly and called it in. Rodriguez showed up 20 minutes later. That's a direct threat, she said, examining the message. We can try to trace the number, but I'm guessing it's a burner phone. Still, it gives us grounds to issue a restraining order. Will that stop her? Rodriguez's expression said it all. A piece of paper wouldn't stop someone who had spent 6 months systematically abusing children and planning murder. We're increasing patrols around the hospital and your home, Rodriguez said instead. And I want you to consider private security, someone who can be with you and the children 24/7. David made the calls. By midnight, 2 ex-Marines from a private security firm were stationed outside the hospital room. By morning, his house would be under surveillance. And by Monday, he would have permanent bodyguards for himself and his children. This was his life now, not corner offices and merger negotiations, but hospital rooms and bodyguards and the constant fear that Vivian would make good on her threat. Emma stirred in her sleep, whimpering. David moved to her bedside immediately. Shh, baby. Daddy's here. You're safe. Her eyes fluttered open. Daddy, is it real? Are we really at the hospital? It's real. Oliver's getting better, and you're safe. Nobody can hurt you here. What about Aunt Vivian? She can't come here. The police won't let her. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been haunting David since that moment in the dining room. Daddy, why did she hate us so much? And David, who had spent his whole life finding answers to complex problems, had no good answer for his 7-year-old daughter. How could he explain that some people were broken in ways that made them cruel? That Vivian's love for Sarah had curdled into resentment? That watching her sister get everything she wanted while Vivian sacrificed and got nothing had twisted her into something monstrous? I don't think she hated you, Emma. I think she hated her life. And instead of trying to make it better, she decided to hurt the people around her. That's not your fault. It's not Oliver's fault. It's something broken inside her. Will she go to jail? I'm going to make sure of it. Emma nodded slowly. Then she asked one more question. Daddy, what if something happens to you? What if she hurts you and we have to go back to her? That won't happen. But what if it does? David looked at his daughter's terrified face and made a decision. He called Michael Bradford back. Michael, I need you to do something for me first thing Monday morning. Emergency guardianship papers. If anything happens to me, Emma and Oliver go to my brother in California. Not Vivian, never Vivian. Already working on it? And Michael, I need you to do one more thing. I need you to dig into Vivian's life, her finances, her associates, her history, everything. If she's planning something, there will be evidence. Find it. David hung up and turned back to Emma. Mumming is going to happen to me, but if it did, Uncle James would take care of you. Aunt Vivian would never touch you again. I've made sure of it. Emma finally relaxed. Her eyes started to close. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered one last thing. Thank you for coming home early, Daddy. Thank you for seeing us. David sat in the darkened hospital room watching his children sleep and felt the full weight of what he had almost lost. If that merger meeting hadn't been canceled, if he had stayed at the office just one more hour, if he hadn't walked through that dining room at exactly the right moment to see what Vivian had been hiding, his children would still be eating from a dog bowl, still locked in a closet, still being drugged and beaten and starved. And he would have gone on believing everything was fine because it was easier than facing the truth. But he had seen them. And once you see, you can never unsee. Once you know, you can never unknow. The comfortable lie was destroyed forever. Now came the hard part, not just saving his children from Vivian, but saving them from the damage that had already been done, helping them heal, teaching them to trust again, being the father he should have been all along, and keeping them alive long enough to do it. Because somewhere out in the city, Vivian Morgan was planning her next move, and David had no doubt that whatever came next would be worse than anything that had come before. The game had begun, and only one of them would walk away with Emma and Oliver. David looked at his sleeping children and made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took, pay any price, make any sacrifice, cross any line. Vivian wanted a war. She would get one. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had threatened a father's children. And there was nothing more dangerous in this world than that. The weekend passed in a strange limbo of hospital rooms and police interviews and medical examinations that left David's children exhausted and traumatized all over again. By Monday morning, Oliver was stable enough for discharge, though the doctors warned that his developmental progress would need close monitoring for months. Emma had been cleared physically, But the pediatric psychiatrist pulled David aside with concerns about post-traumatic stress disorder and severe anxiety. She's going to need intensive therapy, Dracera Kim explained, her voice gentle but firm. What these children experienced wasn't just abuse. It was systematic torture designed to break their spirits. Emma especially. She was old enough to understand what was happening, to live in constant fear, to feel responsible for protecting her baby brother. That's a crushing weight for a 7-year-old. David signed the therapy consent forms, the discharge papers, the prescription orders. His hand moved automatically while his mind spun through everything that needed to happen next. Court appearance at 9, meeting with Child Protective Services at 11, security briefing at his house at 1, and somewhere in between he had to figure out how to keep his children safe from a woman who had already proven she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. The private security team, 2 former Marines named Patterson and Lee, flanked the family as they left the hospital through a side entrance. David carried Oliver while Emma held his hands so tightly her knuckles went white. They had barely made it to the parking garage when David's phone buzzed with a text from Michael Bradford. Emergency. Vivian's lawyer filed counter motions this morning. She's claiming you kidnapped the children and is requesting immediate custody transfer. Judge wants to see everyone in chambers. Now. David felt his blood pressure spike. She's what? Patterson glanced over. Problem, sir? We need to get to the courthouse, immediately. The drive through downtown traffic was a nightmare. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every car that pulled too close made David's security team tense. Emma sensed the stress and curled into herself in the back seat, one hand clutching Oliver's car seat. Daddy, where are we going? To see a judge, baby. To make sure you and Oliver stay with me. What if the judge believes Aunt Vivian? What if she makes us go back? David met his daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. That will never happen. I promise you. Even if I have to take you both and disappear, you will never go back to her. It was probably the wrong thing to say. Definitely illegal. But the fierce certainty in Emma's eyes told him it was exactly what she needed to hear. Her father would fight for her, would break any rule, cross any line, burn down any bridge to keep her safe. They arrived at the courthouse with 5 minutes to spare. Michael Bradford met them at the security checkpoint, his usually calm face tight with stress. David, I need you to listen very carefully. Vivian has a high-powered attorney named Benjamin Stone, very expensive, very ruthless. He's going to paint her as a devoted aunt who rescued these children from a neglectful father. And he's going to use your work schedule, your absence, everything against you. I don't care what he says about me. All that matters is that Emma and Oliver stay safe. It's not that simple. Vivian still has those guardianship papers signed by Sarah. And despite the abuse allegations, without a criminal conviction, she technically has legal standing. The judge might decide that the children need to be placed in temporary foster care while this gets sorted out. David felt the floor drop out from under him. Foster care? You're telling me my children might be taken away from both of us? It's a possibility we have to prepare for. Karen Martinez from CPS will be there. She's actually on our side, believes your version of events, but she's bound by protocol. If the judge thinks there's any risk to the children from either party, foster placement becomes the safest option in the court's eyes. Emma had gone very still and very quiet. David knelt down in front of her. Emma, I need you to be brave one more time. When we go in there, a judge is going to ask you some questions. I need you to tell the truth. All of it, even the scary parts. Can you do that? She nodded, but her eyes were huge with fear. Will Aunt Vivian be there? Yes, but she can't hurt you. I'll be right there, and so will Patterson and Lee. Nothing bad will happen. I swear. They entered Judge Patricia Morrison's chambers at exactly 9 a.m. It was a small room dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She gestured for everyone to sit. Vivian sat on the opposite side of the room with her attorney, Benjamin Stone, a silver-haired man in a $3,000 suit. Vivian had transformed herself again. Gone was the casual cashmere and jeans. Today she wore a modest navy dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a conservative bun. She looked like a grieving sister, worried and maternal. When she saw Emma, her face crumpled with what looked like genuine concern. "Oh, Emma, sweetheart, are you all right? I've been so worried." Emma shrank back against David's leg. That simple reaction said more than any words could have. Judge Morrison noticed. Her eyes sharpened. "Everyone sit. Mr. Stone, you filed an emergency motion claiming that Mr. Chen removed the children from Ms. Morgan's care without authorization and in violation of established guardianship protocols. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Morgan has been the primary caretaker for these children for 6 months, as designated by their late mother, Sarah Chen. Mr. Chen has been largely absent due to his demanding work schedule. Last Thursday, he arrived home unexpectedly, became violent, and forcibly removed the children while making wild accusations of abuse. Ms. Morgan is deeply concerned for the children's welfare and requests immediate return of custody pending a full investigation." Michael Bradford stood. "Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Chen did not remove the children without cause. He discovered them eating from a dog bowl due to deliberate starvation. When he confronted Ms. Morgan, she admitted to locking the children in a closet for hours each day, to withholding food, and to drugging the 18-month-old with adult doses of sleep medication. Mr. Chen immediately brought both children to Presbyterian Hospital, where medical staff documented extensive evidence of abuse. I have photos, medical reports, and testimony from Dr. Jennifer Huang and the hospital social worker." He passed a folder to the judge. Judge Morrison opened it, and David watched her face change as she looked through the photographs. The closet with its chain and bucket, Emma's bruises in various stages of healing, Oliver's burn marks, the medical report detailing the dangerous levels of medication in Oliver's system. When she looked up, her expression was cold. "Ms. Morgan, these are serious allegations. Do you deny them?" Benjamin Stone answered before Vivian could speak. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies any abuse. The children were adequately fed and cared for. Any disciplinary measures taken were appropriate and necessary. As for the closet, that was a timeout space used when Emma became dangerously aggressive toward her baby brother. Ms. Morgan feared for Oliver's safety." "Emma is 7 years old," Judge Morrison said flatly. "Are you seriously suggesting she poses a danger to her infant brother that would require being chained in a closet?" "Children under severe emotional stress can become violent, Your Honor. Emma was struggling with her mother's death. Ms. Morgan made difficult but necessary choices to protect both children." "What about the medication? The hospital found dangerous levels of adult sleep medication in Oliver's system. A regrettable accident. The child was fussy. Ms. Morgan may have accidentally given a double dose. She's not a medical professional. These things happen." Judge Morrison's jaw tightened. She turned to Karen Martinez. "Ms. Martinez, Child Protective Services has had 3 days to investigate. What's your assessment?" Karen stood consulting her notes. "Your Honor, based on interviews with the children, medical evidence, and investigation of the home, I believe the abuse allegations are credible and severe. Emma Chen provided detailed, consistent testimony about prolonged neglect, physical abuse, and imprisonment. Oliver Chen, while too young to give testimony, shows physical evidence consistent with abuse. Additionally, we discovered that Miss Morgan has a prior history that wasn't disclosed to the family." "What history?" 10 years ago, Ms. Morgan was employed as a home health care aide in Boston. She was terminated after multiple families reported missing medications and jewelry. No charges were filed, but there's a pattern of behavior that raises serious concerns." Vivian's mask slipped for just a second. Fury flashed across her face before the concerned aunt expression returned. "Those were lies. Wealthy families looking for someone to blame when they misplace things." "Yet it happened with 4 different families," Karen said quietly. "And now we have allegations of medication abuse involving a child in your care. The pattern is concerning." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying Vivian with an expression that made it clear she had already reached a conclusion. "Mr. Morgan, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you lock these children in a closet?" Vivian hesitated. Benjamin Stone touched her arm, a clear signal not to answer, but she shook him off. "I used appropriate timeouts when necessary. Emma was difficult, and Oliver cried constantly. I needed a way to manage their behavior while Mr. Chen was too busy with his career to help." "So that's a yes." It's complicated, Your Honor. These children needed discipline, structure. Sarah was too soft with them, especially Emma. Someone had to teach them proper behavior. By chaining a 7-year-old in a dark closet for hours at a time? I never said hours, maybe 30 minutes, an hour at most. Emma made a small sound. David looked down to see tears streaming down her face. She was shaking her head, her mouth forming the word no over and over. Judge Morrison noticed. Emma, sweetheart, would you like to tell me about the closet? Emma looked up at David. He nodded encouragement. She took a shaky breath and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an hour, Your Honor. It was all day, from when Daddy left for work until he came home, sometimes longer. One weekend, she locked us in Friday morning and didn't let us out until Sunday night. There's no bathroom in there, no light, just the chain and the bucket in the dark. The room went absolutely silent. Even Benjamin Stone looked uncomfortable. All day? Judge Morrison's voice was gentle, but her eyes were furious. Every day? Yes, ma'am. Every day Daddy went to work. She said we were too expensive to feed and too annoying to listen to. She said if we were quiet and good, maybe she'd remember to give us dinner. And the dog food? Can you tell me about that? Emma's voice got even smaller. Sometimes she forgot dinner, or said we didn't deserve it because Oliver cried too much. So after she went to bed, I would sneak downstairs and get food from Rocky's bowl. It was the only food I could reach that she wouldn't notice was gone. I fed Oliver first. He's just a baby. He needed it more. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. When she looked up, her expression was carved from stone. Ms. Morgan, in 30 years on the bench, I have seen a lot of terrible things. But watching you sit there and try to justify what you did to these children makes me physically ill. Benjamin Stone stood quickly. Your Honor, my client denies these allegations. We request a full investigation before any custody decisions are made. Oh, there will be an investigation, Mr. Stone, a criminal one. Bailiff, please have Ms. Morgan taken into custody. I'm issuing a warrant for her arrest on charges of child abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and assault. Vivian shot to her feet. What? You can't do this. I have rights. I have legal guardianship. You had guardianship. As of this moment, those papers are voided. You will have no contact with these children pending criminal trial. And if I have anything to say about it, you'll spend the next 20 years in prison thinking about what you did. Two bailiffs moved toward Vivian. She looked around wildly. Her composure finally shattered completely. This isn't over, David. You think you've won? You haven't even begun to understand what's coming. I'm owed. Sarah promised me. These children and everything that comes with them belongs to me. The bailiffs grabbed her arms. As they dragged her toward the door, Vivian twisted back one more time. You should have died in that car accident last month. If Marcus had done his job right then, none of this would be happening. The room froze. Every person present understood what they had just heard. Vivian had just admitted, in front of a judge and multiple witnesses, that she had tried to have David killed. Judge Morrison's face went white. Did you just confess to attempted murder? Vivian seemed to realize what she'd said. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Benjamin Stone put his head in his hands. Get her out of here, Judge Morrison said, and someone called Detective Rodriguez. Now. The bailiffs hauled Vivian out, her screams echoing down the hallway. David pulled Emma close, covering her ears. Oliver started crying, picking up on the tension. The peaceful resolution David had hoped for had just become something much darker and more dangerous. Detective Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes. Judge Morrison's chambers had become an impromptu crime scene with everyone present giving statements about what they had heard. Rodriguez listened to the recording of the hearing that the court reporter had captured, her expression growing grimmer with each word. A car accident last month, she said, looking at David. Tell me about that. David's mind raced back. I was driving home from the office. Late October, around 10 p.m, a truck ran a red light and nearly hit me. I swerved, went up on the sidewalk, but avoided the collision. I thought it was just a drunk driver or someone not paying attention. Did you report it? No, I was fine. The car was fine. It seemed like just one of those things. Rodriguez pulled out her phone and made several calls. Within minutes, she had traffic camera footage being sent to her. They watched on her phone screen as David's Mercedes approached an intersection. A black pickup truck with no plates appeared from a side street, accelerating hard toward David's car. At the last second, David swerved. The pickup kept going without slowing down. "That wasn't an accident," Rodriguez said. "That was a deliberate attempt to cause a collision. If you'd been hit at that angle and speed, it likely would have been fatal." Ms. Morgan just admitted to conspiracy to commit murder. Emma made a small, whimpering sound. David looked down to see his daughter's face had gone gray. "She tried to kill you? Before? But she failed. And I'm right here. I'm safe." "But she tried. And she said someone named Marcus was supposed to do the job." "Daddy, who's Marcus?" That was the question David had been dreading. Who was Marcus? And if Vivian had hired someone to kill David once, what was to stop her from trying again? Rodriguez seemed to read his mind. "Mr. Chen, I'm assigning protective detail to you and your family immediately. Until we identify and locate this Marcus person, you're all in danger." "He might have been the construction worker," Michael Bradford said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. "3 months ago, you had renovations done on the house. New deck, some interior work. There was a crew of about 6 men. I remember you mentioned one of them gave Vivian a lot of attention. Made you uncomfortable." David's blood ran cold as the memory surfaced. A tall man with tattoos, always finding excuses to talk to Vivian, always watching the house with calculating eyes. David had mentioned it to Vivian once, jokingly asked if she had an admirer. She'd laughed it off, but she'd been recruiting him, learning the layout of the house, the security system, David's routine, everything she'd need to plan the perfect murder. "His name was on the contractor's invoice," David said. "I can get you the records." "Do it, now. We need to identify and locate him before he tries again." The meeting ended with David signing temporary sole custody papers and Vivian being transported from the courthouse to county jail. Bail would be set tomorrow, but Judge Morrison had made it clear she would argue for remand without bail, given the flight risk and danger to the victims. David carried Oliver and held Emma's hand as they walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by Patterson, Lee, and now 2 police officers. The late morning sun felt surreal after the dimness of the judge's chambers. Emma squinted in the brightness, her face still pale and drawn. "Daddy, can we go home now?" David thought about the house where Vivian had tortured his children. The closet with its chain, the dining room where he'd found them eating dog food. Could they ever feel safe there again? Could he? "Not yet, baby. First we're going to a hotel, somewhere safe and new. We'll get room service and watch movies and just be together. Then tomorrow we'll figure out next steps." "What about Rocky? We left him alone." David made a mental note to call the dog sitter who used to come before Sarah died. Rocky would be fine. Right now, the only priority was keeping his children safe. They drove to a downtown hotel, checked in under false names, and took a suite on the 12th floor with Patterson and Lee stationed outside. Emma immediately crawled into one of the beds and curled into a ball. Oliver, still weak from the medication ordeal, fell asleep in David's arms. David sat in the growing darkness, holding his son and watching his daughter sleep, and felt the full weight of what had almost happened. If he hadn't come home early that Thursday, if he'd stayed at the office one more hour, if Vivian's plan with Marcus had succeeded and David had died in that accident, his children would have been completely in her power. She would have starved them, beaten them, drugged them, all while maintaining her perfect facade to the outside world. And when they were old enough to potentially tell someone, she would have made sure they had an accident too. Tragic, but these things happened. 2 orphaned children succumbing to the grief of losing both parents. And Vivian would have walked away with $47 million and no witnesses. David's phone buzzed, a text from Detective Rodriguez. "Found Marcus Cole in contractor records. Has priors for assault and armed robbery. Served 8 years, released 2 years ago. Last known address is abandoned. Issuing arrest warrant now. Stay alert." So Marcus Cole was a violent criminal Vivian had seduced and recruited, a man who had already proven he was willing to kill for money. And he was out there somewhere, knowing his plan had failed, knowing David was still alive and Vivian was in custody, a desperate man with nothing to lose. Patterson knocked softly and entered when David waved him in. "Sir, Detective Rodriguez sent Cole's photo. You should see this." He handed David his phone. The mugshot showed a man in his late 30s, 6'2" according to the height chart, with a shaved head and a neck covered in tattoos. His eyes were flat and cold. David studied the face, committing it to memory. This was the man who had tried to kill him, who had been inside his house, measuring and planning and preparing to make his children orphans. If you see this man, sir, you don't engage. You call us immediately and you run. He's extremely dangerous. David nodded. He'd spent his entire adult life in boardrooms and offices, fighting with contracts and negotiations. He had no illusions about his ability to physically defend against someone like Marcus Cole. His only advantage was awareness and the security team. Without them, he and his children were helpless. Around 9 p.m., a knock on the hotel room door made Patterson tense. He checked the peephole, then opened it cautiously. Margaret Patel stood there holding a shoebox, looking exhausted but determined. "Mrs. Patel?" David stood confused. "How did you find us?" "I followed the police cars from the courthouse, Mr. Chen. I need to show you something I have been documenting for months." She stepped inside, and that's when David saw the second figure in the hallway. Marcus Cole. Patterson reached for his weapon, but Marcus was faster. The gun appeared in his hand like magic, pointing at the security guard. "Nobody moves," Marcus said calmly. The hotel room door burst open. Vivian stepped in behind Marcus, her face twisted with rage. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in custody. But David saw the bail bracelet on her ankle. Someone had posted her bond. Vivian must have called in favors. Emergency bail hearing, some technicality about medical needs or a judicial process. It wouldn't last. By morning, when prosecutors presented the full evidence, she'd be remanded. But for these few hours, she was free, and she'd use that freedom to come here, to finish what Marcus had started. "You should have stayed a while, David," Vivian said. "You should have let me have what I was owed." Margaret stepped forward, placing herself between David and the guns. "These children have suffered enough. If you want to hurt someone, hurt me." "Gladly," Marcus said. The gunshot was deafening in the small hotel room. Margaret Patel crumpled. The bullet had struck her chest, dead center. She fell backward, and David caught her before she hit the floor. Blood bloomed across her cardigan, spreading fast. Too fast. "No," David screamed. He lowered her gently, his hands pressing against the wound. "Mrs. Patel, stay with me. Patterson, call an ambulance." But Patterson was already moving, grappling with Marcus. The two men crashed into the wall. Lee lunged for Vivian, tackling her to the ground. Emma screamed, clutching Oliver, pressing herself into the corner of the room. Marcus was stronger than Patterson. He threw the security guard off, raised his gun toward David. Lee saw it happening, released Vivian, and threw himself between the weapon and David's children. The second gunshot rang out. Lee went down, hit in the shoulder. David had no weapon, no training, no chance against a professional killer. But he had everything to lose. He launched himself at Marcus, using his body weight to drive the man backward. They crashed through the bathroom door, slamming into the sink. The gun went off again. Wild, the bullet embedded in the ceiling. David grabbed Marcus's wrist, smashing it against the counter. Once, twice, 3 times. The gun clattered into the bathtub. Marcus drove his elbow into David's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. He couldn't breathe. Marcus shoved him off for the gun. David kicked out, his foot connecting with Marcus's jaw. The man's head snapped back. David scrambled into the tub, grabbed the gun. His hands were shaking, covered in Margaret's blood. But he aimed at Marcus and pulled the trigger. The 4th gunshot of the night. Marcus Cole fell, hit in the thigh. He went down screaming, clutching his leg. Blood poured between his fingers. David stumbled out of the bathroom, the gun still in his hand. Patterson was on his feet now, securing Vivian with zip ties. Lee was conscious, applying pressure to his own shoulder wound. Emma was still in the corner, holding Oliver, both children frozen in shock. And Margaret. Margaret lay where David had left her, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Mrs. Patel," he whispered, "help is coming. Just hold on." Her hand moved, found his. Her lips formed words he could barely hear. "The children, are they safe?" David looked at Emma and Oliver, alive, unharmed. "They're safe because of you." Margaret smiled, just barely. "Good. That's good." Her grip tightened. Mr. Chen, don't let work steal them again. Promise me. I promise, I swear. Love them. Every day. That's all that matters. Her hand went slack. Her eyes stayed open, but the light behind them faded. Margaret Patel, 72 years old, retired social worker, guardian angel to two children she barely knew, was gone. Sirens wailed outside. Police poured into the hotel room. Paramedics rushed to Margaret, to Lee, to Marcus. But it was too late for Margaret. She had given everything. Detective Rodriguez arrived within minutes. She took in the scene. The blood, the bodies, the crying children. David still kneeling beside Margaret, covered in her blood, a gun in his hand. Mr. Chen, she said gently, I need you to put the weapon down. David looked at the gun as if seeing it for the first time. He set it on the floor, his hands shaking. She saved us, he said. She saved my children. Rodriguez nodded. I know, we'll need statements from everyone. But first, let's get you and the kids out of here. They took Emma and Oliver to a separate room. David refused to leave Margaret's body. He sat beside her until the medical examiner came, until they zipped her into a black bag, until they wheeled her away. Only then did he stand. Only then did he realize that Emma was watching from the doorway, her face pale, her eyes enormous. Daddy, she whispered, is the nice lady dead? David couldn't lie, not anymore. Yes, baby, she's gone. Because she saved us? Because she saved us. Emma started to cry. Not the terrified sobs of before. Something deeper. Grief for a woman who had been braver than anyone Emma had ever known. David held his daughter and let her cry. For Margaret. For everything they had lost. For everything they had almost lost. It was over. Vivian and Marcus were in custody. The nightmare was finally ending. But the terrible, unbearable cost. Margaret Patel had given her life, and David Chen would spend the rest of his making sure that sacrifice meant something. The Silent Witnesses, Part 3. 5 days after Margaret Patel's funeral, David Chen woke at 2:30 in the morning to his phone buzzing. The nightmares were still constant. Emma hadn't slept a full night since watching Margaret die. Oliver woke screaming every few hours, though he was too young to understand what he'd witnessed. They were still at the hotel, different room, but the FBI had insisted they stay put until the investigation was complete. Patterson was recovering from the fight with Marcus. Lee was in the hospital, shoulder surgery successful, and David was trying to hold his family together while processing trauma that would take years to unpack. The phone buzzed again. Detective Rodriguez. Mr. Chen, we have a situation. The phone call came at 2:30 in the morning. David jolted awake, his hand automatically reaching for his children to make sure they were still there. Emma stirred but didn't wake. Oliver made a small sound and settled back into sleep. The phone buzzed again, vibrating against the nightstand. Detective Rodriguez. David's heart sank as he carefully extricated himself from between his children and stepped into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind him. Rodriguez. Mr. Chen, we have a situation. Marcus Cole was spotted an hour ago at a gas station 3 miles from your hotel. Security footage shows him asking the clerk questions. We think he's looking for you. David's blood turned to ice. How would he know where we are? We're working on that, but right now I need you to wake your security team and prepare to move. We're sending units to escort you to a safe house. You have 10 minutes. The line went dead. David stood in the bathroom, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror. 42 years old, but he looked 60. Gray around the temples that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. The face of a man who had aged a decade in days. But there was something else in that reflection now. Something that hadn't been there 6 months ago when he'd buried himself in work and pretended his children didn't need him. Steel. Purpose. The absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to keep Emma and Oliver safe. He opened the bathroom door and moved quickly to wake Patterson and Lee. Within 5 minutes, they had Emma wrapped in a blanket and Oliver in David's arms, moving down the service elevator to an underground parking garage where 3 police cars waited. Emma was awake now, confused and frightened. Daddy, what's happening? We're going somewhere safer, baby. Just a precaution. But Emma wasn't stupid. She saw the guns, the urgent movements, the grim faces of the police officers. "He's coming, isn't he? The man Aunt Vivian hired, Marcus." David couldn't lie to her, not anymore. "The police think he might be looking for us, but we're not going to let him find us." They drove through empty streets, 3 cars in convoy, taking random turns and doubling back to ensure no one followed. Emma pressed against David's side, trembling. Oliver slept through it all, still recovering from the days of drugging. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a quiet suburb 40 minutes outside the city. 2 agents from the FBI were already there. Rodriguez had called in federal help once Marcus Cole's extensive criminal record came to light. Attempted murder of a CEO with 2 small children as collateral damage qualified for federal involvement. Inside, the house was plain but comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room with furniture that looked like it came from a budget hotel chain. Emma looked around with wide eyes. "Are we going to live here?" "Just for a little while, until they catch Marcus." "What if they don't catch him?" David knelt down to her level. "They will, and even if it takes time, we're safe here. Nobody knows where we are. Patterson and Lee are here. The FBI is here. Nothing bad can happen." But even as he said it, David wondered if that was true. Marcus Cole had found them at the hotel somehow. What was to stop him from finding them here? The answer came 3 hours later when Detective Rodriguez arrived with FBI Special Agent Carol Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen it all. "Mr. Chen, we need to talk about how Marcus Cole found your hotel." David had put Emma and Oliver to bed in one of the bedrooms, both children clinging to him until exhaustion finally claimed them. Now he sat at the cheap kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. "I'm listening." Agent Williams pulled out her tablet and showed him a series of photos. His car, the hotel entrance, him carrying Oliver with Emma holding his hand, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. These were found on a camera hidden in Marcus Cole's abandoned apartment. "He's been surveilling you for weeks, maybe months. He knows your car, your routines, the security team you hired. He probably has contacts inside the police department feeding him information." David felt sick. "You're saying we have a leak?" "We're saying Marcus Cole is more sophisticated than your average hired killer. He's patient, methodical, and he's not going to give up just because Vivian got arrested. In fact, that might make him more dangerous." "Oui, because now he's not getting paid, his employer is in custody, and her assets are frozen. So either he cuts his losses and runs, or he decides to finish the job anyway. Maybe for revenge. Maybe because he's been obsessed with it too long to let it go. Men like Cole, they don't think like normal people. Once they lock onto a target, they don't stop." Rodriguez leaned forward. "David, we need to talk about Margaret Patel." The sudden shift in topic confused him. "What about her? You mentioned she was your neighbor, that she witnessed some of the abuse. Did she ever say anything about documenting what she saw?" "She said she had photos and notes, a journal. Why?" "Because we sent officers to her house this morning to collect any evidence, and what we found changes everything." Rodriguez pulled out an evidence bag containing a battered shoebox. Inside, David could see the edge of a spiral notebook, loose photographs, what looked like a USB drive. Margaret Patel wasn't just a concerned neighbor, David. She was a retired social worker who spent 40 years investigating child abuse cases. And when she saw what was happening to your children, she didn't just watch. She built a case, a comprehensive, meticulous case that would have held up in any court. Rodriguez opened the box and carefully removed the notebook. She documented everything. Dates, times, descriptions. She took over 100 photographs through her window. She recorded audio of Vivian screaming at the children. She even tracked Vivian's comings and goings, noted when she left Emma and Oliver alone for hours. She pulled out a photograph. David's breath caught. It showed Emma, pressed against an upstairs window, her face streaked with tears, clearly screaming for help. The photo was time-stamped. 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago. David had been in a merger meeting, celebrating a successful acquisition with champagne, while his daughter screamed for rescue. "There's more," Agent Williams said quietly. Margaret also documented several meetings between Vivian and Marcus Cole. She didn't know his name, but she photographed them together. at restaurants, at your house when you weren't home. In Margaret's notes, she refers to him as the dangerous man. She showed David another photo, Vivian and Marcus sitting in a car parked down the street from David's house. Their heads close together, Vivian's hand on Marcus's arm, the intimacy obvious even through a telephoto lens. Margaret knew something bad was being planned. Look at this entry from 3 weeks ago. Rodriguez read from the notebook. September 15th, the dangerous man was at the Chen house again today, this time with tools. He spent 2 hours examining the deck, the doors, the security system. V watched from the window smiling. I fear they are planning something terrible. I must document everything. If something happens to Mr. Chen, if those children become orphans, the world needs to know it wasn't an accident. The words hit David like a physical blow. Margaret had known. She'd seen it all. And she'd been trying to protect his children the only way she knew how, by building an evidence trail that would expose Vivian and Marcus even if their plan succeeded. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she just come to my door and show me all this? She tried, Rodriguez said gently. Look at this entry from a month ago. August 20th. I knocked on Mr. Chen's door this evening. Wanted to show him what I'd collected, but he barely opened the door, said he was on an important call, asked if we could talk another time. He looked exhausted, defeated. I don't think he's ready to see the truth. I'll wait, keep documenting. Eventually he'll have to see. David put his head in his hands. Margaret had tried to save his children a month before he finally opened his eyes, and he'd brushed her off because he was too busy, too important, too wrapped up in his own grief to pay attention. There's one more thing, Agent Williams said. She opened to the last page Margaret had written. The entry was dated the day before she died. October 10th. I can't wait any longer. Mr. Chen came home early today, saw the children eating from the dog bowl. The look on his face, the absolute horror. He finally sees. But I fear V and the dangerous man are close to executing their plan. I heard them through the fence last night. They spoke of Thursday. This Thursday. Something about when he comes home. I'm going to Mr. Chen's house tomorrow with everything I've collected. He needs to know the full scope of what he's facing. The children need protection. And if V and Marcus try anything, at least the evidence will exist. The entry ended there, because the next day Margaret had walked into a murder conspiracy and paid for her intervention with her life. She knew, David whispered. She knew they were going to try to kill me that Thursday. She was coming to warn me. And she died protecting you and your children, Rodriguez said. She put herself between you and a gun. That wasn't impulse, David. That was the culmination of months of watching, caring, documenting. She gave her life to save yours. David felt tears burning in his eyes. I barely knew her. We'd wave hello, make small talk about the weather. I didn't know her first name until I saw it on the hospital forms. She was just the nice old lady next door, and she died for my children. She died doing what she'd done her whole career, protecting children. And because of her, we have everything we need to put Vivian away for life and to find Marcus Cole. Agent Williams pulled out the USB drive. Margaret was thorough. She created digital backups of everything, and she included something else, a video diary. She recorded herself explaining what she'd witnessed, why she believed the children were in danger, and what she thought Vivian and Marcus were planning. It's time-stamped, authenticated, unimpeachable evidence. She plugged the drive into her laptop and turned it so David could see the screen. Margaret's face appeared, recorded in her home office, the same room where the shoebox had been found. She looked tired but determined. My name is Margaret Patel. I'm recording this on October 9th. If you're watching this, it means something has happened to me, or something has happened to David Chen and his children. I need to document what I've witnessed over the past 5 months. David watched as Margaret methodically laid out everything. The abuse she'd seen, the meetings between Vivian and Marcus, the overheard conversations about money and inheritance and removing obstacles. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of a woman who had testified in hundreds of court cases. I believe Vivian Morgan is systematically abusing Emma and Oliver Chen while planning to murder their father. I believe she has enlisted the help of a man I've identified through vehicle registration as Marcus Cole, who has a criminal record including assault and armed robbery. I believe their plan is to make David Chen's death look like an accident so Vivian can claim custody of the children and control of his substantial assets. Margaret leaned closer to the camera. If I'm right, those children are living in a nightmare. And if David Chen dies, that nightmare becomes permanent. So I'm leaving this evidence in a safe place with instructions to deliver it to the police if anything happens to me or to the Chen family. Because some things are more important than minding your own business. Some things require action, even when that action puts you at risk. The video ended. The room was silent. David sat staring at the blank screen, seeing Margaret's determined face in his mind. She had known the danger, had known that intervening might cost her everything, and she'd done it anyway. The trial is scheduled for 6 months from now, Rodriguez said. But with this evidence, Vivian's attorney is already talking about a plea deal. She's looking at 40 years minimum. Maybe life if we can prove she ordered your murder. What about Marcus Cole? Agent Williams' expression darkened. He's still out there, and he's dangerous in a way Vivian never was. Vivian is a manipulator, a planner. Marcus is a weapon. Once pointed at a target, he doesn't stop until the job is done or he's captured. So what do we do? You stay here. You stay hidden. You let us do our job. We have every law enforcement agency in 3 states looking for him. He can't hide forever. But as the days turned into weeks, Marcus Cole remained at large. David settled into a strange routine at the safe house. Mornings with Emma and Oliver, trying to establish some sense of normalcy. Afternoons on video calls with therapists who specialized in childhood trauma. Evenings reading stories and holding his children until they fell asleep. Emma was having nightmares every night. She'd wake up screaming, convinced Vivian was in the room or that Marcus had found them. David would hold her and rock her and remind her she was safe, but he could see the toll it was taking. The dark circles under her eyes, the way she startled at every unexpected sound. Oliver was struggling too, though in different ways. The pediatrician warned that the repeated drugging might have affected his development. At 18 months, he should have been walking steadily, speaking simple words, showing curiosity about the world. Instead, he was lethargic, clingy, afraid of anyone except David and Emma. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric psychiatrist, came to the safe house twice a week. After one session with Emma, she pulled David aside. She's experiencing severe PTSD, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the inability to relax, all textbook symptoms. But there's something else. She's terrified of losing you. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. But in her mind, you already left once. For 6 months, you were physically present, but emotionally absent. And during that time, she was tortured. So her trauma brain has made a connection. When daddy leaves, bad things happen. She needs to rebuild trust in your permanence. How do I do that? Time, consistency, never promising something you can't deliver. And therapy, lots of therapy. 3 weeks into their stay at the safe house, Michael Bradford brought papers for David to sign. The lawsuit against Vivian's estate, claiming damages for the children's medical expenses and trauma. The custody documents finalizing sole guardianship, and one other document David had requested. Are you sure about this? Michael asked, sliding the paper across the table. This is permanent. Once you sign, there's no going back. David didn't hesitate. He signed his name and dated it. The official resignation from Chen Capital, the company he'd spent 20 years building. He was no longer CEO, no longer an executive, no longer part of the business world that had consumed his life and nearly cost him his children. I'm sure. What's the company worth if I lose Emma and Oliver? The board accepted your recommendation. Tom's officially the new CEO. You'll stay on as a consultant, minimal hours, mainly from home. Your stake in the company remains the same, so financially you're still secure. I don't care about the money, Michael. I care about being present for my children. Emma had been listening from the doorway. David saw her there and held out his arm. She ran to him and climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in years. At 7 years old, she was getting too big for lap sitting. But right now, she needed to be close to her father, needed the physical confirmation that he was real and staying. You really quit forever? She asked. I really quit forever. My only job now is being your dad. What if you get bored? What if you miss the office? Then I'll find a hobby. Maybe I'll learn to cook something besides scrambled eggs, or take up painting, or we'll all learn to play an instrument together. But I won't go back to that life, Emma, I promise. She laid her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Okay, Daddy, I believe you. The trial date was set for January. Vivian's attorney had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but she refused. She still believed she could convince a jury that she was the victim, that David was lying, that the evidence was fabricated. Her delusion remained intact even from a jail cell. On a cold November morning, 4 weeks after the confrontation in Judge Morrison's chambers, Detective Rodriguez called with news that made David's blood run cold. We found Marcus Cole, or rather, he found us. What does that mean? He walked into a police station in Pittsburgh this morning and turned himself in, said he wants to make a deal. David felt a surge of relief so intense it made him dizzy. He's in custody? It's over? He's in custody. Whether it's over depends on what he has to say. 2 days later, David sat in a conference room at FBI headquarters with Rodriguez, Agent Williams, and a federal prosecutor named Jennifer Martinez. On a monitor, Marcus Cole appeared via video feed from the Pittsburgh Detention Center. He looked different from his mugshot, older, tired, but those flat, cold eyes were the same. David felt Emma's hand tighten in his. He'd brought her because the prosecutor thought her presence might push Marcus toward full cooperation, a reminder that his targets were a father and a traumatized child. Mr. Cole, Jennifer Martinez began, you've indicated you want to provide testimony against Vivian Morgan in exchange for a reduced sentence. Is that correct? Marcus nodded. His voice was rough, deep. I'll tell you everything. How we met, how she recruited me, what we planned, all of it. But I want immunity on the murder conspiracy charges. That's not going to happen, Martinez said flatly. You tried to kill Mr. Chen. You would have orphaned 2 young children, and you're complicit in the death of Margaret Patel. Best I can offer is a reduction, 20 years instead of life. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at David through the screen. I want you to know something. I didn't want to kill you. It was just a game, nothing personal. David felt rage surge through him. Just you were going to make my children orphans for money. Yeah, for money. That's how the world works, Mr. Chen. You have money because you were willing to do whatever it took to get it. I don't have money, so I do whatever it takes to get it. We're not that different. We are nothing alike. Maybe, but I'm the one who's going to give you what you want. Complete testimony about Vivian, every conversation, every plan, everything you need to make sure she never sees daylight again. Marcus leaned forward. But I want something too. I want that deal. 20 years. I'll be 60 when I get out. That's my offer. Martinez looked at David. It's your call. We can proceed without his testimony. We have Margaret Patel's evidence. But with Marcus's insider account, the case becomes absolutely airtight. David looked at Emma. His daughter's face was pale, her eyes enormous. She'd heard Marcus talk casually about planning to kill her father, about making it just a job. And now David had to decide whether to give this monster a lighter sentence in exchange for justice. Emma squeezed his hand. Do it, Daddy. Make sure she can never hurt anyone else. David turned back to the screen. 20 years, full testimony, complete cooperation, and you stay away from my family forever. Marcus nodded. Deal. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus Cole laid out everything. How Vivian had approached him during the renovation job, flirting at first, then slowly revealing her situation. Her resentment over Sarah's death and the inheritance. Her guardianship of the children. Her access to David's assets through them. She was smart about it, Marcus said. Didn't come right out and say, kill my brother-in-law. It started with complaints. How difficult the kids were. How much they won. How she was trapped in this caretaker role while David got to live his rich life. Built sympathy first. When did it turn into murder for hire? Martinez asked. About 2 months after we met. We were in bed and she just said it. What would you do for $500,000? I said probably anything. And she said, would you remove an obstacle? That's how she phrased it. Remove an obstacle. Marcus described how the plan evolved. Make it look like an accident. A car crash would be best. David drove the same route every day, late at night when he finally left the office. Perfect opportunity. We tried it in October. I waited at that intersection, planned to T-bone his car at 60 miles an hour. Should have killed him instantly, but he swerved at the last second, went up on the sidewalk. I kept driving. Vivian was furious, said I'd failed, said she'd only pay half if I couldn't finish the job. So you tried again, Rodriguez said. We were planning to, going to rig his car. Brake failure, but then he came home early that Thursday and caught Vivian. Whole thing fell apart. David listened to it all with a growing sense of unreality. These two people had casually discussed murdering him like they were planning a home renovation. Margaret had been collateral damage. Emma and Oliver would have been next, though Marcus claimed Vivian had planned to stage that as a murder-suicide. Grieving children take their own lives out of despair. By the time Marcus finished, it was dark outside. David felt hollowed out, exhausted, but he had what he needed: complete, detailed testimony that would bury Vivian Morgan forever. The trial began on a freezing January morning. David had asked Emma if she wanted to attend. She'd said yes. She wanted to see Aunt Vivian's face when the verdict came in. The courthouse was mobbed with media. Cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions. Patterson and Lee formed a barrier around David and Emma as they pushed through. Oliver was with a social worker in a private room, too young to testify, too vulnerable to be exposed to the circus. Judge Morrison presided, her expression stern, as she gavelled the room to order. Vivian sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face drawn. She'd lost weight in jail. The polished facade was completely gone. When she saw Emma, something flickered in her eyes, not remorse, anger, as if Emma had personally betrayed her by surviving. The prosecution called witness after witness, doctors who detailed Emma's injuries, police who described the closet with its chain, Marcus Cole testifying via video link from prison, laying out the entire murder conspiracy, and finally the video of Margaret Patel explaining from beyond the grave what she'd witnessed. The courtroom was silent as Margaret's face filled the screen, her voice calm and professional, her evidence damning. When the video ended, several jurors were crying. The defense calls Vivian Morgan, Benjamin Stone said. Vivian took the stand, and for 3 hours she tried to paint herself as the victim, claimed David was lying, claimed Emma was coached, claimed Marcus was making it up for a reduced sentence, claimed Margaret had been senile and confused. Then Jennifer Martinez stood for cross-examination. Ms. Morgan, you testified that you never harmed these children. Is that correct? That's correct. Then please explain these photographs. Martinez displayed the pictures from Margaret's collection. Emma with bruises, Emma at the window, clearly screaming, Oliver with burn marks. Are these fabricated? They must be. I'd never hurt those children. And this? Martinez played audio from Margaret's recordings. Vivian's voice screaming at Emma. You're worthless, just like your mother. I should have let you starve. The sound of a slap. Emma crying. Vivian's face went white. That's taken out of context. Really? What context makes it acceptable to hit a 7-year-old child and tell her you should have let her starve? I was stressed. Do you know how hard it is to care for 2 children alone? David was never there. So you punished the children for their father's absence? I didn't punish them. I disciplined them when necessary. Martinez moved in for the kill. Miss Morgan, in Judge Morrison's chambers, you said, and I quote, Marcus should have done his job right and killed David in that car accident. Do you remember saying that? Vivian's attorney objected, but Judge Morrison overruled. Answer the question, Ms. Morgan. I was upset. I didn't mean it. You didn't mean that you hired Marcus Cole to murder David Chen? I never hired him to do anything. Martinez played the recording of Marcus's testimony. His detailed description of Vivian recruiting him, the promised payment, the planning sessions, everything. By the time Martinez finished, Vivian was in tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage. I deserve that money. Sarah promised me. I gave up my life for her, and she gave me nothing. So you decided to take it by abusing her children and murdering her husband. They deserved it, all of them. David deserved to die for ignoring those brats. Emma deserved to be punished for being so much like Sarah, weak and whining. Oliver deserved nothing but what I gave him because he existed. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel, but it was too late. Vivian had finally dropped the mask completely, had admitted in open court to everything. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the four women stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: child abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, assault, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder. Judge Morrison looked at Vivian with undisguised contempt. Morgan, in 30 years on this bench, I have never encountered someone as thoroughly devoid of humanity as you. You tortured children. You plotted murder. You showed no remorse, no recognition of the suffering you caused. I hereby sentence you to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. And I hope you spend every one of those days thinking about the children whose lives you tried to destroy. The bailiffs led Vivian away. She didn't go quietly. She screamed and fought, hurling insults at David and Emma. This isn't over. You'll never be free of me. I'll haunt you forever. But she was wrong, because as the courtroom doors closed behind her, David felt something lift. A weight he'd been carrying since that Thursday evening when he'd seen his children eating from a dog bowl. It was over. Truly over. Emma leaned against him. She's really gone? Forever? Forever, baby. She'll be an old woman when she gets out of prison. And we'll be long gone, living our lives, happy and safe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. David ignored them all except one, a journalist from the local paper who'd covered the trial fairly. Mr. Chen, what's next for you and your family? David looked down at Emma, then over at Patterson, who was bringing Oliver out. His children, his whole world. We're going to honor Margaret Patel. I'm establishing a foundation in her name, the Margaret Patel Child Advocacy Fund. It will train neighbors, teachers, anyone who might witness abuse to recognize it and report it. Because Margaret saw what was happening and tried to help. And she died saving my children. The least I can do is make sure her legacy lives on. 3 years later, David stood in front of Margaret Patel's grave on the anniversary of her death. Emma was 11 now, tall and healthy, her face bright with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. Oliver was 4, chattering about dinosaurs and wanting to see if Grandma Margaret's stone had flowers yet. They placed white roses on the grave, Margaret's favorite. Emma had written a letter that she read aloud. Dear Grandma Margaret, that's what I call you in my head because you were more family than Aunt Vivian ever was. Today I turned 11. I'm in 6th grade. I have friends. I'm on the soccer team. And I want to be a social worker, just like you. I want to help kids who are scared and hurt, the way you tried to help me. Daddy says you'd be proud. I hope that's true. Thank you for saving us. I'll never forget you. Love, Emma. David wiped his eyes. 3 years and he still couldn't think about Margaret without emotion. The woman who had barely known him but had given everything to protect his children. Rachel Patel, Margaret's daughter, stood nearby with her siblings. She came forward and hugged Emma. She would have loved you. She loved all children, but especially the brave ones. And you, Emma, are the bravest. Later at the community center built with funds from the Margaret Patel Foundation, Emma volunteered at the helpline. She was too young to counsel victims, but she helped with administrative work, answered phones when appropriate, and spoke at events about her experience. David watched her from across the room, talking to a group of teachers about warning signs of abuse. His daughter, his brave, brilliant, damaged, healing daughter. She'd been through hell, but she'd survived, and now she was determined to make sure no other child had to endure what she had. Oliver ran up and crashed into David's legs. Daddy, Miss Sarah says I can paint the mural. Can I, please? The community center mural was a tribute to Margaret. Local artists had designed it, but they wanted children from the foundation's programs to help paint it. Oliver, young as he was, could certainly help. Of course you can, buddy. You'll do a great job. As Oliver ran off to get paint, Michael Bradford appeared. David, the foundation's 1-year report is ready. You might want to see this. David took the folder. In its first 3 years, the Margaret Patel Foundation had trained over 10,000 teachers, neighbors, and community members in recognizing signs of child abuse. They'd created a hotline that had received 15,000 calls. They'd helped identify and rescue 247 children from abusive situations. 247 lives saved because one woman had refused to look away. She'd be so proud, Michael said quietly. I hope so. God, I hope so. That evening, David made dinner for his children in their new house. They'd moved from the home where the abuse had happened, couldn't stay there with the memories. This new place was smaller, more modest, but it was theirs, safe, full of light and laughter. Emma helped him set the table while Oliver colored at the counter. Normal, everyday family life, the kind David had taken for granted before Sarah died. The kind he'd almost lost forever because he'd been too afraid to face his grief. Daddy, Emma said suddenly, do you ever think about Aunt Vivian? David paused. They'd talked about this in therapy, the importance of being honest. Sometimes, mostly I wonder how someone becomes that broken, that cruel. I feel sad for her in a way. She wasted her whole life on bitterness. I don't feel sad for her. Is that bad? No, baby, you don't have to forgive her. You don't have to feel anything for her. She hurt you terribly. However you feel is valid. Emma was quiet for a moment, arranging forks carefully. I think about Grandma Margaret more. I wish I'd known her better. I wish I'd said thank you. She knew. Trust me, she knew. How can you be sure? Because the last thing she said before she died was asking if you were safe. She didn't think about herself. She thought about you. That's love, Emma. Pure love. And you don't need words to understand that kind of love. It just is. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. I'm going to be just like her. When I grow up, I'm going to save kids. I know you will. You already are. They ate dinner together, talking about school and soccer practice, and Oliver's upcoming birthday party. Ordinary things. Beautiful, mundane, precious, ordinary things. After the children were asleep, David sat alone in the quiet house. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo he kept there. Sarah, on their wedding day, radiant and laughing. Next to her stood a younger Vivian, smiling at the camera, before bitterness consumed her, before cruelty became her defining characteristic. Two sisters, one who had loved selflessly, one who had loved selfishly, and the difference had meant everything. David opened a new text to Rachel Patel. Thank you again for today. Your mother saved my children's lives. I will never stop being grateful. The reply came quickly. She'd say she was just doing her job. But we know better. She loved fiercely. And that love lives on in Emma, in Oliver, in every child your foundation helps. That's the legacy that matters. Not the how she died, but the why. Love always wins in the end, David. Always. David read those words and felt peace settle over him. Love always wins. Margaret had proven that. She'd loved two children. She barely knew more than Vivian had loved anything in her entire life. And that love had changed everything. He walked to Emma's room and watched her sleep, peaceful now, nightmares mostly gone. Then to Oliver's room, where his son sprawled across the bed with stuffed dinosaurs scattered everywhere. His children, safe, healing, loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, therapy sessions and foundation meetings, and the endless work of helping traumatized children rebuild their lives. But tonight, in this quiet house, David Chen could finally rest. Because he'd done what he set out to do. He'd saved his children. He'd honored Margaret's sacrifice. He'd become the father Emma and Oliver deserved. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not money or power or success, just love. Pure, fierce, protective love. The kind of love that builds foundations. The kind that saves lives. The kind that endures. The kind that wins, always.